Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to New Brit Workshop. I've been asked a number of times to make a video about the various hand planes that I use. And my most recent request came from a chap called Martin Kintrup. And so, well, the tide of opinion says I've got to do it. So here we go. I'm actually going to start by showing you the planes that I've had from years ago. And these I rarely use anymore. But I'm going to show them now because they actually cover a far greater range of type of plane than I actually use today. And my planes that I use today are under a little sheet here, and I'll get to those at the end. Now, what I want to do is to just name the various planes and describe what they're used for. I'm then going to talk about the anatomy of a plane. And give you a couple of tips, I hope. And then I'm going to get on to the planes that I actually use from day to day. Now, these are the main planes that I've grown up with. There's actually one missing, which I'll describe straight away. If you imagine this plane, this is called a jack plane. If you imagine this, but twice as long, so it's probably about this long altogether, from there to about there. Then that is a jointer, and it's a very heavy plane. And I've given it away to a woodworking apprentice, a friend of mine, but that's the only plane that's missing. And a jointer is used for planing flat, large boards, and it's very good at that sort of thing. But anyway, I've got three smoothing planes here. There's one by Stanley, one by Record, and this one on the end made by Miller's Falls. And these are the sort of planes that you would have on the bench and be using most of the time. I've kept three of them sharpened up, and then as one needed sharpening, I put it to one side, then put the next one to one side, and then sharpened all three in one go. It just speeded life up a little bit more. This plane, as I mentioned before, is called a jack plane. It's a bit longer, and actually I quite like this type of plane. It's a little bit heavier, and because it's longer, you can get a much nicer, smooth action with it. And it comes halfway between a general smoothing plane and the jointer, which I described before. Here we have a rebate plane, and now this is for doing, as its name suggests, rebates. And it has a nice right angle section here, which would go down into the rebate with shoulder of wood here and wood you're cutting under there. And it can be adjusted in various ways. I don't think I've used that plane for about 20 years or more. Here we have a plough plane, which was given to me many, many years ago, about 40 years ago. And not long after I got the plough plane, I bought my first router. So this has hardly had any use. And you can put different blades in this. Some are for different sizes of grooves, and some are shaped as a plough plane. And I've got a pair of spoke shaves here. One of them has got a flat bottom, and you would use this for the outside of a curve. And the other one has a curved bottom here, and you would use that for the inside of a curve that you were trying to cut. And then we have this little plane. Now this, I believe, is called a violin maker's plane. And this was made by my father when he had an ambition to make a violin. You can see it's got a curved section here. And it's very simple, made out of a piece of beech. And this plain blade in here has got a serrated edge for roughing out. I'll now cover the anatomy of the plane. This is the body of the plane, and the underneath side is called the sole. Front and rear handles, and then you have in the middle a number of parts. Now this is the cap lever, and it's there to hold the blade assembly in place. And then the blade assembly is usually in two parts. There's the blade itself, which is here, and then there's a piece attached to it by a screw, and this piece is a cap iron, and the front edge here acts as a chip deflector. And I can take this apart now. Now when I take this apart, I do it very carefully so that I don't risk damaging the cutting edge. And you see I've drawn it backwards, then through that hole there, and that's it, separate. Now I've covered sharpening plane irons in a pair of videos which I made a while ago. One thing I will mention is that the cap iron needs a little bit of attention, and that is this edge at the bottom here needs to be flat. And you can get it true by cleaning up on a stone or using lapping techniques, as my sharpening videos will have shown you. Now this whole centre assembly, which I'm going to now remove, is called the frog. And there are a pair of screws, one here and one here, which keep the frog in place. Now the position of the frog can be adjusted, and if you have a look here, there's a little frog adjusting screw at the back here, and at the back of the frog there's this little cutout section here, and that fits down into the recess in that screw, so that you can adjust the frog forwards and backwards. And you would adjust this so it forms a nice straight path from the face of the frog down through the hole in the sole or the body of the plane. Ordinarily one wouldn't take this apart, but it's useful if you want to clean up an old plane to know that it's something that you can take off, clean up and then replace. But I'm going to reassemble it now, and before I tighten those screws up I'm going to just make sure that it's adjusted in the correct position, and make any adjustment to the frog adjustment screw at the back here, and then tighten it up. The sole should be perfectly flat, and you can, I think I mentioned this in my lapping video, using a lapping technique on a piece of abrasive film, lap the base of the plane, the sole of the plane, so it's perfectly flat. After you've sharpened the plane and you come to reassemble it, you have to ensure that you protect this sharp edge. This one's as blunt as old Harry, but you ensure you protect that edge. And then if you look at where the bevel is, you're going to have that bevel supported, the cutting edge supported from the rear by the cap iron. And now we're going to feed the nut through there, and I'm now going to take this so it's well past the end of the cap iron before I try and move it across, and that's to protect that sharp edge. I'm then going to move this down, and the sort of gap that you want between the leading edge of the cap iron and the sharp edge of the blade of the plane needs to be about 0.5 millimetre. And when you've got it there, make sure the two are running parallel. You can then tighten it up. Now just before we place the blade back in, there's this adjustment lever here for lateral adjustment, and on the end here there's a little spigot, and there's a rectangular hole here which that spigot goes through. On the back here there's that large screw which we tightened up, and there's a recess for that screw here, and this is a tightening screw at the front here which is called the lever cap screw, and that's going to go through that hole like so. And we want to make sure that that little spigot is through that rectangular hole there. Next we're going to take the lever cap, and we're going to insert it down over that screw. Now if you can see, it goes down and then goes all the way down here, and we're looking for a nice uniform symmetrical adjustment. And then the locking cam lever here would be locked into place. Now when you do that, you may need to adjust the screw so that when you do this lock here, that does form a positive lock. After I've reassembled a plane, I then give the lateral adjusting lever a few wiggles to and fro to make sure it's all seated. I also adjust the depth adjustment nut at the back backwards, and then I start making the adjustment to get the plane running true. And what you're doing by using this depth adjusting nut and also the lateral adjustment lever is you're trying to get that blade so it's absolutely perfect for what you're about to do. And that means the depth of cut and the uniformity of cut across the width of the blade. Now, these are the planes that I use from day to day, and these three here are made by Veritas, and I'll come to those in a minute. These two are Stanley planes, and this one came from Lee Valley. I'm not sure if it's under the Veritas name or not, I can't remember. And let's start with this one. This is a shoulder plane, and the idea of this one is that the plane width is the same as the blade width, and so you can get into awkward places with it very easily. And with this particular one, you can take it apart, and if I just loosen that screw there, and you can now see that what you effectively have is a chisel mounted in a little carrier here. And that's very useful for getting into awkward corners when at the end of a rebate where you're coming up against a stopped end or something like that. So that's particularly useful. And you can then easily rejoin it to its better half. And you have to be careful that you make sure you do this correctly so that there's enough space for the shavings to come up through the mechanism, and then just tighten it like so. And that's quite nicely made. Now, this little plane is from Lee Valley, is very similar to the Violin maker's plane, although quite a bit bigger. It has a curved sole here and a curved blade. And I got this in order to make the seats of chairs so that they're scalloped out, and that's how that one is used. And here we have a block plane made by Stanley. Now it's got an interesting mechanism. In order to release the cap, you loosen that off there, and away it comes. Not very clean in there, whoops. And you replace this in the same way. And its lateral adjustment features here. That's to get the blade right that way. And the depth screw is here. And I've actually got two of these. I'll come on to this one in a second. The reason I've got two is that I've had this one for a long time. Perhaps I should have shown it with the first lot, but I didn't, because I actually still use this one a lot today. And I use this for those tasks where it's just a little bit rougher. The wood's a bit rougher. I don't need to be so careful, and so on and so forth. So that's the purpose of that one. Its cousin here, the one from Veritas, this is a low angle block plane, and this has a PMV 11 blade. If I just release this, the lever cap locking mechanism is under here, and that comes back now. So that's released. All three of these planes have one feature which I'll describe now, and that is, in order to facilitate the stability of the blade in this sort of plane, so that it's not dipping down too much under here or under there, it's got a pair of set screws, one on this side, one on that side. And you can adjust these, and these actually stabilise the blade so that it doesn't go off from that sort of true setting. And it's on both of these other two planes as well. There's a set screw there and a set screw there. And one would use a screwdriver like this to adjust that set screw and get it just right. And all three of these planes have the bevel up. If I remove the blade, and now you can see that the bevel is uppermost. Now this red on here, when I sharpen my blades, before I start sharpening, I put a bit of permanent felt tip pen on them, and as I'm sharpening I can see the progress to make sure it's even, and you'll see that on all of my planes. Now the adjustment mechanism on here, which is similar to the other planes, is under here, and that operates in two ways. One is it can facilitate the movement of the blade this way, but also part of it anchors in here, and this part anchors in that hole there, in that recess there, and therefore you can adjust the blade to and fro with that knob on the end. And when you place the blade back in, you need to ensure that this mechanism registers in this hole here. You need to ensure that the blade fits in between the two screws, which are left and right, and I only lightly undid the right hand one, so I'll now tighten that back up again. And once that's ready, I give it a little wiggle, just a slight wiggle, put the lever cap back in place, and now, having had it apart, I would test it to make sure it's running true. Now the low angle smoothing plane and the low angle jack plane have the similar mechanisms on them, but obviously the jack plane is much bigger. For both of these planes, the blade is set 1/3 of the way along the length of the sole. Now I'll take this one apart and remove the cap, and I'm going to just very slightly loosen off the grub screw there a fraction to make it easier to remove the blade. And there's the blade of the plane. You notice there's no cap iron with these at all, and again you can see where I have put the permanent marker on there when I've been sharpening my plane. Now under here is a similar mechanism that we saw on the block plane, although this time it stayed in there when I took it out. That will come out if I pull, I think. So there's the adjustment mechanism. And I'm going to push it back down into that hole again so it's back home. We've got the same pair of grub screws there. We've also got the ability so that the toe can be adjusted, and if I undo the knob here, and there's an adjusting screw here so that the actual mouth can open and close to suit one's needs. Let's tighten that back up again. When one's placing the blade back in, remember it's bevel up, and one places it in very carefully so as not to damage that nice edge that one's put on there. So the blade's in there. One would very carefully line this up and get the two grub screws set up properly. Now I only loosened this right hand one, so I'm pretty sure that if I tighten it, that I'll be back in pretty much the same position. Now when placing the lever cap back in with this plane and also its big brother, the jack plane, it's placed in there, and you're then going to tighten here. Now the amount of pressure, because of the leverage here between that point and that point, is quite high. One doesn't want to tighten this very much at all. It's just finger tight, and it's not it's not a Tarzan job. It's just loosely tightened with one's finger. One would get used to that. You would know when it's too loose. And once this is in the right position, tighten it up, not too tight, and it's ready for action, or certainly for testing. And as you use it, you would just make any adjustments that you need to get it running absolutely spot on. And its big brother, the jack plane, is exactly the same mechanism as we saw with the smoothing plane. Now I must tell you that these three planes from Lee Valley, the low angle jack, low angle smoothing, and the low angle block plane, are not cheap. Now, I bought mine directly from Lee Valley. They are stocked by Axminster in the United Kingdom, and I can say nothing other than that these are the most magnificent planes that I've ever used, and certainly the best planes that I've ever owned. They're wonderful. And the advantage of this low angle, it really does make the final act of smoothing something so easy. I'll give you a demo. Right, let's just see these in action now. This is the low angle jack plane. This is a piece of sapele. And I don't know if you can see, these are sort of shavings. One's getting like so. Now here's the low angle smoothing plane. Let's have a look at this. It's just slightly too coarse for me at the moment. I'm pretty sure that's just right now. And the low angle block plane, well, I've certainly had this apart. And you can see just how fine these shavings are. Really lovely. Now you may have seen this little gizmo on the bench just now, and this is designed to make it easier to plane an edge of a board square. And it's got magnets in it. It fixes onto the side of the plane just by magnetic attraction. And what you do is, as you're using it, you keep this flat against the board. And in that manner, you produce a nice square edge. This is made by Lee Valley under the Veritas name, and you can find it on their website. Very useful bit of kit. Well, that's a quick look at the planes that I have used and the ones that I do use. I hope that's helped you a bit. Now, if you're able to get a Veritas plane, particularly their low angle planes, I really recommend it. These are an absolute joy to use. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.